Hello. That doesn't sound very sexy. Today we'll be talking about everything you need to know about the digital SAT. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joey. I've been in the test preparation industry for almost 20 years now. I've been through 3 SAT changes now. So there was one in 2003/2004, there was one in 2016, and now there's the one in 2023/2024. What's interesting is that every time there's been a change with College Board, there seems to be some weird swing of the pendulum, and there seems to be a lot of misinformation. So today I'm going to be clarifying what my thoughts are on this new digital SAT. So for those of you who've been living under a rock, here's a quick summary about the new SAT. Number 1, it's shorter. Number 2, it's adaptive so that there are far fewer questions. Number 3, there's no non-calculator section anymore. Number 4, you're not gonna have to wait more than a couple days for your score report. Here are some quick overviews of each of the sections of the test. So for example, here in the reading section, the old reading section looks like this. Okay, so it used to be that the passages were 500 to 750 words. Now, the new passages are between 25 and 150 words, so far shorter. So unfortunately, this leads to a false sense of confidence for the students. They're like, oh my gosh, it's so short. It's gonna be so easy. Why is it not easy? Well, let's look at this, right? So here are the 4 old passages on the SAT, right? You'd have literature, social science, history, and natural science. And now you see the new types of passages. The only difference is that the history passages have been replaced with poetry passages. Here are my takeaways on why this test isn't going to be as straightforward as you might feel it might be. Number 1, students are still going to need to know the domain-specific nuances of vocabulary. That means that when you use a word in one situation, it's not going to carry the same meaning in a different type of situation. For example, the word exploit, right? When you think of the word exploit, you're like, oh my gosh, so-and-so's taking advantage of me. But in a science context, exploit just means do something to your advantage. So you're going to exploit your resources, you're going to exploit money, but it doesn't carry a negative connotation at all. When are you taking the SAT? Are you in 8th grade right now and thinking about how you're going to prepare in the long run? One thing you can do right now to prep for it is to read. Don't just read Hunger Games, don't just read Harry Potter. My students who've done the best on this test actually are familiar with reading 1800s and 1900s literature like Pride and Prejudice, Jane Eyre. In fact, here's a fun fact. My student who got a perfect 1600 this year actually tried to read War and Peace when she was in 3rd grade. So with this shorter test, what happens is the comprehension isn't going to be like having to comprehend huge numbers of passages, but the comprehension will then narrow down to your understanding of specific vocabulary. So you should be prepping vocabulary, and this is just a long-term thing that you're going to need to work on if you want to improve your score on this new test. The last thing about the reading test is it's not just going to focus on reading. Just kind of like this last version of the SAT, there's also going to be a lot of data literacy, which makes sense because we live in the information age. As a fun gift for you, here's an example of a poetry passage. With this one, students get the wrong answer because they interpret the poem too literally. So a lot of students might choose B or C because that's literally what you're seeing in the poem at face value. But if you think about poetry, people wrote poetry for a reason back then, and a lot of times the reason was to praise somebody, to show somebody that they were in love with somebody, or to lament or complain about something. So if you understand that context of poetry, then maybe you can see why A might be a better answer. Here's another example of domain-specific understanding. So this is a science passage. And a lot of students struggle with science passages because they're used to reading things out of their textbook where things maybe like list steps, explain a process. So if you look at this particular passage, then you can see why a choice like A might be really, really tempting because it uses the word explain. But I challenge my students to think about, wait, who's writing this article? This is usually showing up in a magazine, and this is usually highlighting some specific development of one scientist. So then it should make sense that they wouldn't really talk about other people in the field. B would also be a trap answer because you'd expect a science passage to talk about central findings, but why would you present the central finding in the second sentence of a passage? It's kind of a weird place to put it. Same with answer choice C, right? Why would you, in a really, really short passage, talk about something you weren't able to do? So then, kind of by process elimination, we can get to answer choice D without even reading the passage itself. Obviously, don't do that. You should be reading the passage. But my goal with you, if you're prepping for the SAT, is to understand the context from which these passages arose. Moving on to the writing section. So with this new test, there's not two different sections, right? So the reading and writing are going to be kind of embedded together, but the structure is going to be that you're going to get a few reading questions first, then you might get a few vocab questions, and then it'll move on to the more writing and grammar section. Here are some of the topics that you might see. If you're struggling with the writing section and need a lot of practice questions, you can actually use some of the old writing passages from the old SAT or even from the old SAT from pre-2016. So here are some conceptions that they're going to continue to exploit. Number one, students love to rely on the idea of this sounds the best. That's why a lot of students come out of the digital SAT or digital PSAT thinking, oh my gosh, this is such an easy test. Everything was easy to read and I just circled the answer that sounded the best without knowing that half the time the answer that sounds best is probably wrong. Another misconception that I want you to get out of your mind if you're prepping for this is that you should put commas wherever you pause. That is not a rule. And here's a freebie for you. A lot of students come in thinking that colons are exclusively used for listing. That's not true. So for those of you who are eager to get a head start on this game, leave a comment below for what the true use of a colon is. And then there's this one new type of question that I want you to be familiar with. This is the summary question, let's say. Basically, they give you a bunch of bullet points and they ask you to come up with a sentence that kind of mushes them all together. I've never seen this type of question on any of the old SATs or any other standardized test for that measure, but here's an interesting trick that I'm going to continue to try to exploit. I've been able to answer all these questions without actually spending time on the bullet points. Instead, I focus on the question stem itself, and that's a mistake that a lot of students love to make because they don't follow directions. So these questions usually show up in the last two questions on each of the reading writing modules. So go ahead, give that a shot and see if it works for you. So what are some things that you can do to improve on your writing if you're planning to take the digital SAT or the ACT for that matter? Well, number one, you need to learn formal grammar rules. I do not know the last time a student has come to me having taken a formal grammar class. Number two, you should be getting direct writing feedback from your teachers. So the issue with a lot of teachers is they have too many essays to grade, so they'll just kind of give you an A or a B without giving you a lot of feedback. I think it's in your best interest to either reach out to your teacher at school or find some sort of writing coach who can guide you with proper writing, because I don't know how many times I've seen students use comma splices, use dangling modifiers, have errors in subject-verb agreement and comma placement. Do not be one of those students. Lastly, the thing you can work on is understanding how punctuation or word choice enhances or detracts from the meaning of a sentence. For example, appositives allow the writer to add extra description that enhances a sentence. Colons allow writers to emphasize their claim in addition to other things. Dashes can be used to add ancillary opinions or ideas, but can also use to enhance the claim as well. Okay, the other section that is going to be on this test is the math section, everybody's favorite. I have this really cool graph that was created by one of my colleagues, Michael McGibbon, who runs Math Chops, which is a really awesome math drilling app that we use. So you can see based on this comparison that the types of questions are actually going to be very, very similar with slight alterations in the proportions that they show up. So just like with the writing section, if you want, you can use old SAT practice questions from pre-2016 to kind of prepare for this. So what are some important skills that I think that you might need to do well on this new digital SAT? Number one, you should be really confident with your use of technology, either using your graphing calculator. Number two, you need to be able to analyze data and apply it to word problems, everybody's favorite word problems, right? Number three, you need to be able to translate between the four types of math. One, you can do math numerically or arithmetically, you can do math algebraically with letters. You can do math graphically by graphing lines, parabolas, etc. Or you can do math through words. That's where the connection breaks down for a lot of students. Okay, so hopefully that made sense for you. I gave you a quick rundown of the things that I would look at, having gone through all the Blue Book SATs as well as some other platforms. The thing that I'm gonna encourage you to do is to not only prep for the PSAT, but also to take a diagnostic ACT to compare. I think with this new digital SAT, a lot of students are getting lured into a false sense of confidence, thinking, oh my gosh, it's shorter. Oh my gosh, the questions are easier, so then I'm gonna stick with this test. When in reality, about half of the students do just as well, if not better, on the ACT. Even though the test is longer, even though there are more questions, I still think that the SAT is still gonna be something that's worth considering. And remember that colleges have no preference over the digital SAT versus the paper-based ACT. If you need help with any preparation or want help with a diagnostic exam, feel free to leave a comment below. And thanks for watching.